Parents of Reddit, what is the creepiest thing your young child has ever said to you? I was sound asleep, and at around 6 a.m. I was woken up by my 4-year-old daughter's face inches from mine. She looked right into my eyes and whispered, "I want to peel all your skin off." The backstory here is I had been sunburned the previous week and was starting to peel. In my sleep-addled state, however, it was pretty terrifying for a few seconds. I didn't know if I was dreaming or what was going on. Around 4 or 5 months ago, at like 3 a.m. I was awoken by a very weird growling sound. Disoriented and in the dark, I started to come to, and for the life of me couldn't figure out what the sound was. I had fallen asleep on the couch in the living room, which added to my confusion. I was thinking maybe the cat had caught something, but really had no idea. As my vision started to come around, this 3-foot grotesque looking shadow thing starts to appear a few feet in front of me. Just standing there growling. Creepy. Even though in reality it only took me a few seconds to figure out what was going on, I imagine my appearance would have been that of someone who was visibly shaken. It was my son. My 3-year-old son had snuck out of bed at 3 in the morning, found his Hulk mask in the dark, and decided to go find daddy to play superheroes. I guess his idea of playing was to do a Hulk growl 2 feet from my sleeping face until I woke up in a panic. He ended up doing the same thing to my wife a few weeks later, which, to me, was way more hilarious. My kid's Catholic school is over 100 years old. There is a basement under the gym that's used for storage. I was subbing once, and during recess one of the kickballs goes down the stairs. A little girl was standing at the top of the stairs yelling, "Just throw it up to me." I went over and asked who she was talking to, and she replied, "That big man down the stairs." I went down, and there was nobody down there, and it was the only way in. I asked some of the other kids if they have seen the man before, and they said yes, but sister told us not to talk to him. I asked them to describe sister, and they described a nun, and there haven't been nuns at the school in 40 years. Okay, backstory time. When I was a kid, Mr. Rand used to come into my room 4 or 5 times a week. He'd talk to me and tell me about stuff and how he was killed in WW2. See, Allmate Rand was a figment of my 4-year-old imagination. Anyway, one day when I was 9 or so, Mr. Rand stopped showing up. Fast forward to about 3 years ago, and my son, who is about 5 at the time, walks out of his room one night at about 11:30 and says there's a man in his room. I flip out and run in his room to find nobody, to which he then says, "Mr. Rand said you can't see him anymore, but he's okay." The kid's got his own imaginary mate called Mr. Rand, but they only chat once or twice a year. My niece was sitting on the couch with a weird look on her face. Her mom asked her what she was thinking about, and she said, "I'm imagining the waves of blood rushing over me." Turned out they had been at a local science museum with an exhibit on the circulatory system. One of the features was a walk among some giant fake blood vessels, and she was remembering that. So a friend of mine was 6 years old when she told her mother that the lady who used to live here told me that she hates the wallpaper and that you're covering her note. My friend's mom just thought it was make-believe rambling and forgot about it. Well, 12 years later, when the mom is redecorating and taking down the wallpaper in the attic, she finds a suicide note scratched into the wall. The mom freaks the fuck out and calls my friend and starts crying, asking if she remembered anything more about the women who spoke to her. My friend starts to recall the woman and starts to freak out, saying she only remembered talking to her in the attic. I work in a preschool. Creepy shit gets said and done all the time. The one that sticks out to me happened last year. There is a small kitchenette area in our classroom that the kids use during free time for playing house or whatever pretend games they think up. There was one little girl that I was keeping a close eye on, mostly because of how withdrawn from the other kids she was. I noticed she was playing with a baby doll in the kitchenette, rocking it back and forth and singing to it. She then took the baby, shoved it into the play oven, and slammed the door shut. She turned around, looked straight at me, and said, "Sometimes bad babies go in timeout," in the creepiest little girl voice I've ever heard, before smiling and running off. That one kind of shook me. I've had a lot of people messaging me and telling me that I should keep an eye on her parents, suggesting she was abused. The concern is very heartwarming, and I'm glad to see it, but I can assure you that this was not the problem. She just enjoys saying outlandish things because she enjoys the reaction. It's pretty common for kids to do. This was just a more terrifying example. When I was young, like maybe 2 years old, my grandma was in the hospital, dying of cancer. Obviously I had no idea what was going on, but apparently one day, when my mother and aunt were watching me, I suddenly looked at them and said only one grandma. They kept trying to convince me otherwise, that no, I had 2 grandmas, but I kept repeating that line over and over. Then the phone rang. It was my uncle calling to tell my mother that my grandma had passed a few minutes ago. When I was about 4, I would remember talking to Mr. Peterson whenever I was at my grandmother's house. He looked like a hobo from the Great Depression and had a guitar and sang me old-timey blues. He told me that he died when he fell off a train he was riding with, drunk on moonshine. I stopped seeing him when I was about 6. Anyway, 6 months ago I found my dad's old acoustic guitar and started playing, and my little cousin told me, "Mr. Peterson is proud of you," and left. My mum's dad died 10 years before I was born. I was about 6 or 7 when my parents divorced. The day before my mum told me they were divorcing, apparently I was at the kitchen table drawing or something while my mum cooked tea. She says I stopped instantly and looked toward the front door as if I'd heard it open. I stared for a long time, then giggled, turned toward my mum and said Granddad says don't worry, everything will be okay and he won't let anything bad happen. I then began humming and went back to my drawing. My mum says it's the single creepiest thing that's ever happened to her and I have no memory of it happening. I have a daughter and one day after her bath, she told me about this dream she had where she was the monster terrorizing other kids. I found out later that she was being bullied and this was right after Monsters Incorporated came out, so it makes sense in hindsight. But I was shocked when she said how much she enjoyed hurting and scaring them. When my little sister first started talking she used to say some really disturbing things. She used to tell us about how her old family would put things inside of her and would make her cry, but her daddy eventually burned her so much that she was able to find us, her new family. She spoke about things like that from the ages of almost 2 to 4. She was much too young to have ever been exposed to any content where children or anyone else could be sodomized, so my family has always thought she held memories of a prior life. When my son was little maybe 3, he used to do this weird crawl where he would slide his forehead along the floor. That was pretty creepy in itself. Then one night he crawled across the hallway into my room like that and stood up a few inches from my face and made a weird meow sound. He got into bed with me and went to sleep. Another time he was freaking out about a monster in the basement, so we went down and saw nothing, of course, and as I turned out the light and headed upstairs and he said, "Huss right behind us now." I might have peed a little. Possibly the creepiest thing he did was one day I scolded him for misbehaving, so he hid his head under his blanket. I pretended I couldn't find him by saying, "Where is my little Carson?" He slowly lowered the blanket and with a dead evil stare said, "Carson is gone, I am Rick. I'm certain he's possessed. We never knew any Ricks, as far I can remember. Still don't. Never figured out where he picked up the name." I don't know if this is relevant, but here's something I had said when I was a youngster. When I was about 5-ish, my dad's cousin shot his 7-year-old son and then shot himself. His wife filed for divorce and wanted custody of their son, and he went crazy. Well, after this happened my dad and his brothers had to clean out their cousin's house. Since I was the youngest one at the time they all decided, oh, Jess should get this dead child's toys. That's great, so I ended up with one of those little Tykes outdoor play castle. You know, the one that was like a little plastic castle tower and you could sit inside. Such a cool fort. Anyway, the one day I was sitting inside the tower part and my mom was on the deck and she heard me talking to myself. So she comes over and asks who I'm talking to this time. I had a lot of imaginary friends. I told her I was talking to the little boy whose castle it was and told him not to cry because my mommy could be his mommy. My mom promptly had my dad throw the castle out. My 3-year-old nephew was at my cottage. He's asked me numerous times about the girl over there while pointing at one of the back bedrooms. The place is small and there is definitely nobody there, so I just dismiss it as a really active imagination. He has lots of imaginary friends. Then some friends are visiting and they have a daughter around the same age. She has never met my nephew. Twice in the one day she asked about the pretty girl while pointing at the exact same room. Definitely caught me out and I didn't know what to think. Then at Christmas my family was over at my place and my nephew points at a picture of my wife and asks if she is coming to visit us here or does she just stay at the cottage. My wife died 10 years ago. Personally, I don't really believe in paranormal stuff, so it's probably just my logical brain putting together a bunch of kids' ramblings, but it definitely got my attention. I'm not a parent myself, but a friend of mine has a 4-year-old son who lives with his mother. They're separated. One time, he would have been nearly 4, another of the mother's housemates had a litter of puppies and was in the process of trying to find homes for them. The kid put one of them in the front loader washing machine with some laundry and managed to set it on a spin cycle, then went back into his room across from the laundry to play. My friend, the kid's dad, was visiting at the time and heard the machine going. He went to investigate, then saw the puppy and realized what had happened. He just figured the kid didn't know what he was doing and quickly removed the dead puppy to spare his son being traumatized. The kid saw his dad walk past the doorway, went to check the washing machine, and then asked him, "Where is that dead puppy, Daddy?" Quite possibly the creepiest thing I had ever heard of a kid saying doing. Apart from that one incident, he has always been a completely normal boy.